was supposed to say that. Oh, it's Wednesday, July 9th, 2014. Okay, now we can start. So, we have a couple of different, what I did this time was I put everything on one sheet, which makes it a little bit easier for us. We won't get overwhelmed. We may not be able to get through everything tonight, which is fine. We can always leave some material to cover next time. It's better that we have a chance to stew on it than rushing through. So, you're right on time. You knew that we were going to have an introductory schmoozing session. So, the first mashal. Now, I put themes on top to indicate what is the common denominator of these different sayings, or these different mishalim, different proverbs. So they're not written in the book of Mishle, and they don't even reflect the order of the book of Mishle, but these are picked and chosen from different places. So the first one, I put humility and arrogance as the title, and let's see what the first one says. It says Baz Zadon vayavo kalon. So in Hebrew that means, but Zadon is a person who is brazen, which is a hard term even to translate in English, but it means somebody who's basically who purposely doesn't care what the rules are and just does things their own way. Like when we say in Hebrew b'mezid, somebody who violates, does an avirah, does a sin on purpose, we say they did it b'mezid. Zadon means doing something purposely. You don't care. You do things your own way. Vayavo kalon. This will lead to disgrace. If you have zadon, now it rhymes in Hebrew. It doesn't rhyme in English, right? Ba zadon vayavo kalon. It actually rhymes. So to a Hebrew speaker, it's really easy to remember that saying. To us, it doesn't translate as smoothly. Ve'tzinuim chokhmah. But the people who are modest have wisdom. So there's a couple of questions we can ask on this proverb right off the bat. Obviously, we want to know what's the connection between someone being a brazen type of personality, a personality that bucks whatever the rules are and doesn't care about them. What's the connection between that and kalon? Kalon means disgrace, that they're going to be embarrassed. That's the first question. The second question I would put out to you is, it doesn't really match the latter half of the proverb, because the latter half of the proverb doesn't have anything to do with the first half. Right? If the first half said, a brazen individual, we're using the term brazen, is stupid, so then the opposite of that would be the modest person is wise. But here it doesn't say that. It says that the brazen person, the person who doesn't care about what's appropriate or what's expected and just goes and does things their own way. They come in and they come into a restaurant, they put their feet up on the table and they don't care about what's appropriate and inappropriate. That person is going to have disgrace, okay. And the person who's modest is going to be wise. But what does disgrace and wisdom have to do with one another? They don't seem to connect. So, what do you think this is talking about? Let's take the first half. Why do you think that a person who is brazen, who is, that kind of forceful personality who just doesn't care what other people think, why is that person going to end up in a embarrassed or disgraced? Why do you think?
Like a hot-headed person? Is that kind of...
It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a temper, but there are certain people that just, they walk in and they think that they own the world and they can just do things the way that they want, and they simply don't care about whatever is expected or whatever is, like one time in my old synagogue, there was a bar bat mitzvah, I don't remember what it was, and some of the guests, they're not always accustomed. They might go to a Reformed temple or conservative temple. They're not used to the way that we do things, and so this one guy goes and he sits in the women's section, and we said, excuse me, you don't seem to be a woman. I don't want to offend you, but you're sitting in the wrong section. He said, no, I don't believe in this. I'm not going to do this because I don't believe in it. We don't have this separating men and women, and I'm going to sit wherever I want. And of course, eventually we had to redirect him, this individual. I did not do it. I did not personally handle it. Other people did, but that's called zadon. A person comes in and says, "I'm going to do things however I want." So that person, what is the mentality of that person? Let's try to get into the head of this individual. They think that they're better than everybody else, perhaps, right? They must assume that they know better or they are better than everyone else. That the world owes them, something. They can just do things the way that they want.
Can do no wrong.
they don't seem to be worried about doing anything wrong, right? They just come in and they just do things however they feel that they should do them. And they don't have any regard. Like, they come into a totally new place, and on day one, they think that they should be the ones to tell people how to do things. Right? Like, people will come to a new place of employment or a new group or a new whatever, and from day one, they're already bossing people around and telling them how they should do things. This happens all the time, right? So that's zadon in a way, because that means that a person is not concerned about what's expected or what really is going on, what the real dynamic is. They just come in and start thinking that they can move things around. Now, it reminds me of like some of the advice talk show host people that they hear 5 minutes about the person's life and they think that they can tell them the solution to all of their problems. It's much more complicated than that. But people who are very forward and they assert themselves. In other words, they assert themselves thinking that by force of will, they're going to be able to have whatever they want is going to go the way that they want. There are people like that. And so they're very pushy people, right? Overly assertive, pushy people. Eventually, vayavo kalon. Eventually, they end up being disgraced. What's the reason?
Because they're not always right.
They're not always right is certainly true. But the people who are not right can sometimes get away with things for a while, right?
For a while, but eventually.
But this person really is fundamentally out of touch, right? They're out of touch with what's really going on. You can only fight the system so much because you think that you are, stronger than the system, that you're going to be able to beat the system simply by wanting it to be that way. But what's the real way to beat the system? If you're going to beat any system, how do you beat it?
Join.
Well, first they say if you can't beat them, join them, right? But what if you're a really independent person and you say, well, if I join it, I'm going to become one of the sheep, and I'm going to become one of the flock, and then I won't have my own independent spirit anymore, and I won't be able to be a leader anymore, and I'm going to end up being taken advantage of if I don't assert myself like this. So what's the answer to that? People who are pushy like that feel that that's the way to get things done, right? People only understand one language. You have to be harsh with them, and you tell them what to do, and you boss them around, and that's how you get things done. Many people think like that. We've all encountered people like that. So what is this? What is Mishle telling you? That type of person is actually going up against something that they don't really understand, because they never bothered to actually try to learn anything about their environment. They come into, let's say, a new workplace. They come into a new situation. They get involved with a new group of people. And before they learn about that group of people, what makes them tick? What are they about? What do they want? What do they not want? Who are the influential people? Who are not the influential people? What are the potential pitfalls here? What are the points of advantage? They didn't take time to learn anything about the situation. So what did they do? They came full steam ahead to try to push their own agenda. So because they don't really know what they're going into to begin with, of course, eventually they're going to fail because they didn't fully grasp the situation they were walking into. And this can happen all the time. I know stories of, for example, rabbis. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you who or where. Wouldn't want that to go for posterity. But stories of rabbis who literally came to new communities, very strong personalities. Some rabbis are very strong personalities. Everyone's different personalities. Everything are, in every profession you have people who are stronger personalities, softer personalities, have different qualities and different characteristics. But this, particular rabbi came into a community. The first day started yelling and screaming at people. First day. First of all, I don't think it's ever nice to yell and scream, but that's another story. He started yelling, you're doing this wrong, and you're doing this wrong, and you're not doing this right, and you don't know what you're talking about, and you sit over there, and I'm going to tell you this, from the first day. And guess what happened to that rabbi? 8 months later, he was looking for another job.
8 months? Took him that long?
Well, they tried getting rid of him after the first few weeks, but it takes a while. Every process takes a while. 6 months, 8 months. The point was that he went up with just sheer force of personality. He thought he was going to transform the place into the way that he wanted it. And unfortunately, things don't work that way. So that makes sense with the end of the pasuk, actually. V'etzinuim chokhmah. Because a person who comes in and is modest, in other words, they don't think, I'm going to determine how this place is going to run. I'm going to come in with whatever my agenda is. I'm going to tell people how things are done. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm the one who knows. That person is, of course, pushing up against things he or she doesn't even realize. And the backlash, of course, the person cannot anticipate. But v'etzinoim chokhmah, the modest person comes into a new environment and says, you know what, I don't know what I'm dealing with here. I don't know what I'm dealing with. It's a new environment. So I really got to get to know, like, what is the dynamic of this environment? Any environment. It could be a work environment, could be a school environment, could be family, that somebody gets married and now they have in-laws and they have to get to know who are all the different players and, and how they're going to interact with them. It could be any situation in life. If you enter into a situation thinking that by sheer force of will, you're just going to make things the way that you want them because you're a strong person and you're going to assert yourself, then eventually there's going to be pushback. But if you're modest and you take the time to figure out what's really going on, then you have chokhmah. So we said wisdom is not really the opposite of disgrace, right? It's not really. But both people want the same thing here. Okay? Both people want the same thing, which is they want to succeed in their new environment, let's say. They want to succeed in the environment that they're in. One person tries to do it with zadon, just by pushing. That doesn't work. The other person wants to succeed by learning the environment, figuring out what's going on, and gets wisdom. When the person gets wisdom and understands what they're dealing with, who's more powerful actually in the end? The person that is the zadon person, baz zadon, the person who is the strong-willed, assertive person, wants to be that way because they think that that's power. They think that that's power over the situation. That's how they're going to dominate in the situation. But the wise person realizes that it's the opposite. Actually, modesty is what helps you dominate because it gives you a position from which you can learn about your environment and about the people with whom you are dealing before you take action. And it places you in a position of advantage. That's why my advice to rabbis was always, to fellow rabbis who wish to listen to my advice, was never try to change anything in a new community until you're there at least 1 year. Don't change anything about the way that they do things, and don't even suggest they might be doing something wrong for at least 1 year. Because you need to get to know your community first. You need to get to know them first. You need to learn about them first. I think it's a good rule of thumb. Some people could be brighter than others, but I think it's a good rule of thumb to go through a whole year, seeing the whole cycle of the year, how they do everything, how they handle everything, and then once you really comprehend the routines, then and you've built trust, and you actually have insight. Because when you come on the first day and you start telling people what to do, they say you're an outsider. You don't know what you're talking about.
That's a good thing. It's like if you have a new principal in your school, we say for new principals, be in the school for 1 year, look at how the school runs.
I didn't even know that. I should have.
It's an administration.
That was just my rule of thumb for myself, but that makes sense. The hardest thing, honestly, to come into as a new job is like some kind of leadership position, because when you're hired by an organization, let's say to work in an office or something like that, or even to work in a synagogue or wherever, where you know what you need to do and you have a very limited scope of what you need to do. And you're aware of what the expectations are. But when you're leading something and you have never been there before, it's very difficult to lead something that you aren't familiar with, even if you've been in other organizations, because every organization works differently and has its own organizational personality. So anyway, I think this is really the principle of the first mashal. The first one is, don't try to dominate by force of will. Dominate by force of knowledge. And the way you dominate by force of knowledge is you have the patience and the modesty to realize, wait, I don't really know exactly what I'm getting into. I shouldn't just assume that what I think is right is automatically what's right. I should wait and see and allow things to develop and observe before I jump to any conclusions. Okay, it's like there's a famous, not exactly on this topic, but there's a famous story from the Chafetz Chaim, who he said that people ask questions about why does Hashem do this in the world? Why does Hashem do that? Why does Hashem give that person good things, give that person bad things? He treats people differently, and we wonder, where's the justice? How come a bad person seems to succeed and all of that? And he said it's like a person who showed up in a new synagogue. They're visiting from another country. They come to a synagogue, and they see that the Gabbai gives this one an aliyah, and he gives this one this honor, and gives this one another honor. And this visitor comes up and says, "Hey, what are you doing? Why did you give that person the honor? What about the person sitting over there? Why didn't you give them the honor?" And starts trying to tell the Gabbai what to do. And the Gabbai says, "You just got here. That person got the aliyah last week. This person has azkara this week. This person has had a bar mitzvah last week, so he had an aliyah last week." So we don't see the full picture is the point. We are only here for a very short time relative to Hashem. Hashem sees the big plan, obviously. We don't see the big picture. So we're at a disadvantage. But even in the human realm, whenever we come to a new place or to a new situation, we're at a disadvantage until we have the time to really absorb what's going on and really gain a handle on what's going on. And it's very good advice to be modest and not to assume we know everything and we know what the solutions are until we've taken the time to absorb what's around us. Then we have another one that's connected to arrogance of a sort. Lifnei shever yigba levish, v'lifnei chavod anava. So, two lifnei. Lifnei means before. The next one is that too, right? Lifnei shever gaon, v'lifnei chishalon gova ruach. These two are connected. Now let's take the middle one. Before destruction, lifnei shever yigba levish. A person's heart becomes arrogant. Okay? V'lifnei chavod anava. But before the person is going to reach honor, anava, they have to be humble.
They have to be or they are?
Before honor comes humility, meaning if you want honor, you have to be humble. Yeah. So what's the connection between these two pieces here? Is there one? Why is it lifnei shever yigba levish? Why is it that before a fall, before destruction, a person gets arrogant? Why is that? Is it true? Well, why is it true? Is that from experience true? People tend to get haughty, and then boom, the floor it falls out from under them. It happens.
All of a sudden, you see somebody just gets it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like they could be like on top of the world and have everything, and then all of a sudden
Overnight, they could be at the bottom. Right. So why does that happen? Why does that happen?
I think it's a similar idea of last time.
Yeah.
That when you're taking yourself out of a situation and putting yourself in your own world, and thinking you're better than everybody, and it'll fall out from under.
Right.
You're not in the world. You're not looking at what's going on.
So it's definitely connected to that. There's even another element to it. There's a little bit of a difference because an arrogant person and a Zadon person are a little different. The Zadon person is somebody who forces things to be the way that they want, right? Who pushes very hard. The arrogant person is actually sometimes a little bit different than that because an arrogant person just thinks that the world revolves around them automatically, person just thinks the world revolves around them. Things are going to come, I'm succeeding because, it's meant to be. I'm awesome. This is my destiny. And then people get into that mindset, right? I'm too big to fail because I'm just, I'm destined for greatness here. And so what happens when a person thinks that? Let's say like you're winning in a game, right? Just to take a very simplistic example, right? You're winning in a game. And then what happens when you're winning in a game and you say to yourself, wow, I'm winning. This game is in the bag. I'm the best player ever, whatever the game is. What happens? Why do you lose? Why do you oftentimes lose when you start thinking like that? It's not because you got jinxed. People think, I jinxed myself because I thought that I was going to win. That's not the reason.
You don't care as much.
You stop working hard. You don't care as much. You don't pay attention as much because you think that the world is just coming to you. It's coming to you.
The tortoise and the hare.
Exactly like that, right? The tortoise and the hare. Everybody knows the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? Taking a break, too many breaks, because you think, of course I'm going to win. This is going to be so easy. And that is human nature. When we start to think that way, we stop paying attention to the finer details. We think, there's no way I could lose this one. It's going to be so easy. Because everything is just going my way. I'm on a winning streak here. I have nothing to fear. And when we don't have anything to fear, we're not on the top of our game. Because we're not paying attention. Right? We're not being vigilant about the possibility that something could go wrong because we just think that of course everything is going to go right because it's me and I'm great and I'm destined to be on top. So of course Hashem is going to make it that everything just revolves around whatever I need. That's the way people start to think when they do really well sometimes. And they take their eye off the ball, so to speak. They stop paying attention to the factors that can go wrong. And this happens all the time. It happens in business a lot. Where people are doing really well, stop really paying attention to potential problems, and those problems fester and fester and fester, and then by the time they actually notice them, it's too late to fix it. And God forbid this can happen with people's health too. Where they think, oh, of course I'm going to be here a long time. God has a plan for me. I'm going to be here till 120 years. I have nothing to fear. They don't go to the doctor. They don't get a checkup for 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. By the time they go, they have some condition that it's not, it can't be corrected. Because they didn't do what they should have done all along. They just thought that, of course, everything is going to be fine for me because I'm so important to in this world. The world can't exist without me. So how can anything bad happen to me? And people think like that. Why do people drive at 150 miles an hour on the highway? Not that fast, but they drive recklessly because they think I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be here a long time. They never think that something terrible could happen. And that's exactly the problem. When you're not afraid, you don't think something terrible could happen because you think that you're so important to God and so important to the world that you could never be missing from here. Nothing really bad could ever happen to you. That's the worst feeling to have because that stops you from actually being careful about the things you have to be careful about. And that's what he's saying. Lifnei shever yigba lev ish. A person before the fall, there's always arrogance. The person stopped paying attention to the things that they should have been paying attention to. In anything. It could be in anything. A person could be, they had a very interesting study. I just noticed the other day. It said that, in marriages that fall apart, most people reported they had, or in marriages where somebody's unfaithful, they report that the other spouse, the spouse that's cheated on, says, oh, we have a great marriage. Right? Almost always, the other spouse says, we have a great marriage. It's very strange. They think they have a great marriage, but their spouse is not faithful to them. So obviously they don't have such a great marriage. There are problems. But this person is not looking at the problems. They feel like, oh, everything is idealistic, everything is great. They don't want to look at the problems, they don't want to consider them. And therefore the problems fester and bigger problems emerge. And that's what it says. So, v'lefnei chavod anava. Before honor, you need humility. So why is that? Why does humility... Of course, there's a little bit of a... if you're seeking honor, you're not really humble, right?
Yeah, nobody gives them honor. Like they always say that.
Harodef, right. Harodef achar kavod, kavod barachat mimenu. Right. Anybody who chases after kavod, it runs away from you. Right. There's a story about a guy who came to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, it says in the Talmud that, anybody who chases honor, the honor runs away from them. But anybody who runs from honor, the honor will chase after them. Kol haboreach min hakavod. Right? So I always run away from the kavod, so how come I didn't get any honor? So the rabbi said, because when you run away from the kavod, you're always looking over your shoulder to see if it's following you. Right? Meaning you're not really running away. You're running away saying, did you notice I was running away?
It's like backwards.
Yeah. You're not really running away. It's a strategy for you. Right? That's your strategy, is seeming like a very humble person so that you'll get kavod. That's not really being humble. Right? So here though, v'lefnei chavod anava. Okay? I think what it's trying to say, the contrast with the first part of the pasuk, is that just like a person who's very full of themselves doesn't think they need to be careful about certain things, doesn't think they need to be vigilant about certain things, because, of course, they're so important that none of these bad things, nothing could go wrong. Nothing could possibly go wrong because they're just succeeding and they're doing so fantastically. Look at the people who lost so much money, let's say in 2008, that they thought, oh, look, or the .com, situation before that. All of these stock market or real estate market crashes, where the analysts were saying, actually there's a lot of problems, but the people who are bringing in a lot of money said, no, there's no problem, everything is great. And that's the way that it always happens. People are complacent. They get complacent. What does it mean, v'lefnei chavod anava? If you want honor, you have to have humility. So it goes back to something similar to what we said in the first one, but it's a little bit of a different spin. In other words, unlike the haughty person who thinks they don't have to be vigilant, the person who has anava, the person who has humility, realizes that there's a lot of factors that I need to attend to if I want to succeed. I have to work really hard if I want to succeed. It's not going to come easily to me. So therefore, if, for example, if I want to be a bodybuilder, which everybody here wants to be, of course, right? then I'm going to have to go to the gym every day and work on every muscle with a good trainer, and you're going to have discipline, and you have to have anava. And then what happens to the person who invests each day? It's very difficult because they have to be vigilant about what they eat and what exercises they do and how much time they spend and all of that. It's a lot of discipline. It requires humility because it's not just going to come to them. Right? They realize that if I want this, I have to work for it. And that's a humbling thing to think. That's a humbling way to look at the world. Things are not going to come to me naturally. I have to work very hard for them. But then what happens in the end? Kavod. Because they actually achieve something of lasting significance, right? Now you could say, well, being a bodybuilder is not such a great choice. I just put that as an example. Okay, let's say in the spiritual world, somebody wants to become a great scholar of Torah. There's nobody who ever sat on their chair and daydreamed all day and became a great, very knowledgeable in Torah or in any other area just by sitting around. It always requires work. It requires anava. It requires the recognition of, this is not going to come easily to me. I need to put my nose to the grindstone and work on it and invest in it and toil over it and be attentive to the areas where I'm doing well and the areas that I'm not doing well so I can really improve myself. And then that's when the kavod comes, because then people recognize, wow, you're really going to achieve something of lasting value. You really achieve something substantial, as opposed to the person who doesn't recognize the need to be vigilant and to work hard and to have discipline and to be attentive to detail. That person might have success, a windfall of success, but eventually it won't be sustained. It will fall apart. As opposed to the person that has the humility to recognize that they need to really give of themselves and work very hard to get what they're going to get. Okay, it's the exact opposite type of personality. And that's what we should be. We should always be looking at, okay, what can I work on to be better? How can I improve? In whatever we're seeking to achieve. Even if things are going fantastically well, they can always be going better in any area. And if we're not paying attention to the ways that things could be going better, and we're not paying attention to the ways that things might not be going well, but the warning signs, that things might not be going well, like that light goes on in your car, and you're like, oh, that light doesn't mean anything. Right? And then another few months, and then another light goes on. No, that doesn't mean anything either. And then you're stranded on the side of the Grand Central Parkway, and your car broke down. So you don't want to wait for that. You want to look at the warning signs ahead of time, and that's what a person who has anava, who has humility, does, because they don't think that everything is always going to be perfect and they don't have to work. So that is the way to look at life. It's very wise. It's a good way to look. Is it easy to do? Of course not. It's much easier to get into a sort of complacent, when things are going well, just to sit back and enjoy it for a while. And it's much more pleasant that way, but it's not reality. That becomes the arrogance, or yigbalev ish. That's when the sports team starts doing really well, and then they say, now we don't have to worry, and then of course they lose the game because they decided that it wasn't necessary to be vigilant. We don't want to be like that. Even though it's much harder to always be vigilant, there is reality to that. That's why it says, Ashrei adam b'fached tamid. It says, happy is the person who's always afraid. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean you should walk around being afraid of everything. What it means is, always be on the lookout for things that could be going wrong. Because if you overlook them, that's what you want in a doctor, isn't it? You don't want a doctor who every time says, everything is fine. No, you want a doctor that sometimes says, wait, I want to take a closer look, I want to run this test, I want to investigate more, maybe you should see a specialist just to make sure, I want to rule everything out. That's what you want, because that means that they're really looking. And how many times have we heard stories of people that had a problem, and the doctor said, it's nothing, and it ended up being something really bad.
And then there are people that are
Happens.
worried, so it's like
Right. You don't want to be extreme. Right. You don't want to be extreme.
Like people with that personality are very extreme.
Too obsessive compulsive.
Everything is like the end of the world.
Right. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be emotionally obsessive about it. It just means that a person should always be assessing things realistically. Like being realistic is the key. Not being too extreme. Like people who go to medical school and then they think they have every disease, right?
Yeah.
Because they start reading all those things, say, I had that, and I had that too, and I must have this disease. Or they go on those websites that diagnose you, and they start putting in symptoms, and then they think they have some horrific malady, and really it's a cold. So you have to be careful about we have to be realistic, but being realistic is two parts. Being realistic is not thinking everything is always going to be fine, because everything is not always going to be fine. We have to keep our eyes open. But it means also not exaggerating. You don't have to get involved in hyperbole and think the sky is falling every time something goes slightly wrong. That's also extreme. You know, like the other day, my car was making a funny noise, and I said, "Oh my God, what's going on with my car?" It turned out there was just like a branch caught under the tire. But like I was saying, "What is that noise? Oh my gosh, something's falling off the back of my car. Something's gonna, the muffler's dragging on the, or something like that." It turned out to be nothing, but it happens. Okay, so let's go down to where it says the power of speech, the second theme, and see if we can do one or two of these tonight before we exhaust our time.
The first one seems very interesting.
Okay, so what's that one? Evil bayom yivada kasom. Right? The foolish person, his anger is made known on that day. He goes on Twitter, starts tweeting about it. Right? V'chosek kalon arum. But the person, you know what Twitter is, right? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you knew. I wasn't, because I'm a rabbi, I know, but I thought maybe you as a lay person, you weren't familiar with that social media. Yeah. But the person who covers up disgrace is clever. So it's important to note, like Mishle uses different terms for the wise person. Sometimes it will say chacham or navon. Arum is a certain type of wise person. It means a clever person. It doesn't necessarily mean a wise person like the deepest thinking person. Like a lot of times a chacham means a person who's a deep thinker. This is arum. Arum is what the nachash, the snake, is called arum. V'anachash haya arum. The snake that tricks Adam and Chava is called arum, is clever, crafty. The crafty person. So the contrast here is not between foolish and wise as much as between simple or foolish. Evil is somebody who's unsophisticated, let's say, and somebody who is clever. Doesn't necessarily mean they have the right values. Usually a chacham is somebody who has the right values. So people nowadays, especially these celebrities, they're always putting out these statements that are, when they're upset about something, and then they try to take them back and they have to apologize and all that. So what's this talking about here? What does it mean that the anger of the foolish person becomes known on that day? They didn't have Twitter back then, but you don't need that. Then they would go to the tavern with their friends and drink. And
does it mean that you can see it on their face right away?
It could mean that, or it could mean that
people who hide their emotions very well.
Right. Oh, so you mean it could just be talking about how some people they could be really upset about something, but act like everything is fine. Right? And other people, they can't hide it. Like they say that some people, their face shows their emotions, right? Their eyes are the windows to the soul. That's what they say. You could look at them and you can read that they're upset about something. You just know. They can't cover it, right? That's what you? Okay. But that's not something that's a matter of clever. I don't think that applies here because
So you're saying I'm not clever?
No. I'm saying I don't think that it's talking about your type of case because that's just the nature of a person. It's not really something they do.
This one can hide it like you have no.
Oh, really? You're good at hiding? Yeah. Is that true? Okay, that's something that you might be learned. Right. You might be able to learn. You might be able to learn that behavior. I'm not sure, but it could be that it's not fully. Right. It's not fully controllable. Sometimes it's like facial cues and things that we're not even able to. We don't even realize we're doing them. I don't know that that's what it's talking about necessarily. I was thinking about it more that people who are upset, they always talk about it. They talk about it, right? That what do? Someone gets you upset. You call your mother, your father, your uncle, your friends. You go on Facebook. You go on this. You start to. We all know people. If you're on any of these social media sites, that all they do is complain. Right? I hope that's not you.
That's really not me.
Okay.
Facebook is not my diet.
Okay. No?
It's not my diet.
Okay. There are people that all they do is they're always, people are mean, people are terrible, this person did this to me. They don't necessarily name them, but they're always talking about these things. And so they're always talking about it. Okay? That's one type of person. And then there's another person, the chosek kalon.
They have a thought. They
Well, that's another thing. That's just people that they're not selective about what they share. Like, I don't care that you had a bologna sandwich for lunch type of thing. As opposed to, right. But there's some people that everything is negative. It's always about people doing bad things to them. So, that's our modern version of it. But in the timeless version of it is that people will go and complain when they've been hurt, when they've been offended, when they've been insulted. They'll endlessly complain about the slight that has happened to them, and they'll let everybody know about how angry they are, how upset they are. That's what it means. But the clever person covers it up. Covers up meaning, like, let's say somebody insulted you, offended you. So one type of person goes to anybody and everybody who will listen and tells them about it, right? I'm not talking about the Lashon Hara issues, of course. That's a whole other thing. But let's just say something bad happened to them. They were mistreated. Let's factor out the Lashon Hara part. That's it. But they go to everybody that they know, anybody that they can talk to. They spread it around. Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe what. Let's pick a name that nobody here has. Latifa. Is anybody Latifa here? No. Okay. No, really? Okay. I don't know. Well, I had some Latifas in my previous synagogue. It's an Arabic name because it sounded out.
Latifa is an Arabic name?
Yeah, sometimes.
I thought it was African.
No, Queen Latifah is African American, but Latifa itself is an actual African name.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So anyway.
You really know it all. You really do.
I wouldn't exaggerate. If that's knowing it all, then I might be doing well. Anyway, so Latifa has insulted you, and you're really upset, and so you tell all of you complain about, oh my gosh, she's so rude, she's so obnoxious, she's this, she's that. So that's saying the evil. That's the person who's foolish. But the wise person might be insulted. Let's say somebody insulted you or offended you, embarrassed you, humiliated you. They cover it up. Now notice, it doesn't say that they're not upset. It says v'chosek kalon. They cover it up. Because why? Let's take it from this angle. Why does the person go around telling everybody when they're upset? Just think about it for a second. Why? Why do we do that?
Because they need the attention.
They want attention, for sure. What else do they want? What? Sympathy.
You want people to think bad of that person.
You're getting back at that person. That person's such a jerk. Oh my gosh. You're on my side, right? You want to have people feel that they're on your side against that other person because they put you down. So now you say, well, now I need to feel strong again. They offended me. They made me feel low. I want to feel good about myself again. I want to feel strong again. So I want my friends to all know what that horrible, despicable person did, so they can make me feel loved again, and they can make me feel like I restored my sense of self-esteem. Right? Does it really work? What do most people say? They'll listen to you when you complain. But what are they thinking? Oh my God, what a pathetic loser. Why do you care what this person did? Just get over it already. That's what they're thinking in their mind. They won't say that to you. I mean, some people might, but most people will not say that to you. But they're thinking, this person is weak. This person is out of control of their emotions. They're saying this to everybody. They're so upset. I mean, maybe they deserved whatever the person did to them then. You know who did this? Who spoke too much is like Yosef HaTzadik. He started complaining about his life. I was kidnapped, and then they put me in here for nothing, and they put me in there for nothing. And what does the Sar HaMashkim do? What does the wine steward do? He discounts the whole story. Because why? Because he started complaining to him about his life. If Yosef had just gone and impressed him with his ability to interpret dreams, wow, he would have had a lot of kavod. But instead he gave him a sob story about how he's been a victim of everything. I was a victim of this, and I was a victim of that, and I suffered this, and I suffered that. He said, you probably had it coming to you. I don't know the full story, but you probably deserved it. Like when people come and they tell you, I lost my job there because the boss was horrible, so I went to another job, and I lost my job there because that boss was horrible, and then I got kicked out of school because the teacher was horrible, and the principal was horrible, everybody else was horrible. And they tell you about everybody else being bad. After a while, what do you start thinking? Maybe you're the problem. Right? It doesn't help. Whereas, a clever person says, you know how I come out on top from somebody insulting me? by not saying anything. Especially when people know that they insulted or humiliated me and I don't do anything or say anything about it. That's how I get the upper hand, because now who looks better? What? For sure I do.
But I feel like that makes you look like you're weak.
It depends how you do it. I think that the greater weakness is when you let it get to you.
Steps on you. Sometimes, like, letting someone step on you is like you just let it go, but I think then people lose respect for you.
It depends. I think it depends. I think in the short term, you might be right. In certain situations, definitely, and it depends on the situation. But I would say in the immediate moment, you might feel like you're weaker, but people ultimately respect the person more who's able to brush that off than the person who's really, if you're so vulnerable that somebody insulting you makes you so upset that you have to go around to everyone to get their support, then you look much weaker in the big picture. That's the whole idea. In other words, the first person that you complain about the offense that you suffered to might really sympathize with you and support you, but after a while, you end up being perceived in a negative way.
What if they correct the situation? Sometimes, like, you could complain that this person did that, and then the other person can correct it.
That's a totally different story, right? So that there is an idea of what we would say like hocheach tochiach. The Torah says you're supposed to correct somebody. If they offend you or hurt you, you're supposed to try to find a way to make peace with them. That's for sure. We're just talking about the emotional component. Okay? So in the emotional component, the person who looks, what the fool is seeking is to feel better about himself and to restore his dignity or her dignity, but what they actually get is lowering themselves more by looking even worse, looking more pathetic. Whereas the person who covers it up and says, you know what, it was really fine, I understand where they were coming from, they were having a bad day, it was no problem, and I understand, it's all water under the bridge. That person actually ends up coming out smelling like roses compared to the person who yelled and screamed at them. And that's what it means. It doesn't matter what you might have felt upset inside, but the way that you handled it was that you ended up looking like, I'm the one in control here. That person, they did something stupid and they lost control, but I'm in control. Whereas the fool who goes around to everybody complaining shows that I'm not really in control. I really was, my emotions are overwhelming me, and I'm too weak to be able to get them under control myself. I have to run to everybody to tell them about it so I can get their support. So it's talking about the emotional side. But you're right, in terms of correcting somebody, you would try to correct it, for sure. Yes? So clever is one of those things that I would say is morally neutral. Okay? What I mean by that is that somebody could be clever for good or clever for bad. Clever just means that you think strategically. Okay? Now you could be a bad person and your strategic thinking is, I'm going to act like I am not offended by this person's behavior because I want everyone to look at me as being an unbelievably confident person, because later on I'm going to mobilize them to destroy that person. Or whatever you're thinking. You might have the wrong values, but the point is that if you're concerned about preserving your social standing in people's eyes, the right strategy is not to allow it to get to you. Okay? Now, what your motivation behind using that strategy, it could be because, I'm thinking long term, it's not worth it. I'd rather preserve my dignity than get involved in this, and I have better things to do. Or you might have some wicked motive, lurking behind it, like the Nachash in the garden. Because the snake in the garden has an ultimate objective, which is evil, and his strategy is to try to persuade Chava with his arguments. That's the strategy behind it. So being strategic and thinking is good if it's used for a good purpose. Okay? Now, there's so much good here. I just want to do one more, even though we're really running out of time, but I'm going to do it anyway. The second to last one. Okay? The second to last one has a version in English. That's why I love it. So, and then we'll do the rest of these Be'ezrat Hashem next week. We'll leave them. So it says, Gam evil macharish, chacham yechashev. A fool who's quiet will be thought of as a wise person. Otem sifatav navon. Someone who closes his lips will be thought of as a person of understanding. Okay? Now, as we're going to get into more next time, we'll see that the theme that a wise person doesn't show everything that they know. Because a wise person realizes knowledge is power. So you don't necessarily want to show everything that you know. Because you're giving away your advantage, right? That's what it says. That's why it says, Adam arum koseh da'at. A crafty, again, it's crafty, it's cleverness. Crafty person doesn't want to give away everything that they know. Because your knowledge is your power. But the fool tells you everything, right? So spills the beans. So there's a saying from Mark Twain also, the same as this, where he said, it's better to be silent and be thought the fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Right? In other words, if you close your mouth, people don't know what you know. They might think you're a genius. Wow, you listen to everything, you say very little. They think you're some kind of a guru. Really, you have no clue what's going on. Right? You don't know, you're Forrest Gump, you don't know what's happening. But you act, very simple, and you don't say much, and people put you on a pedestal because of that. But once you start talking, then they realize, you have no clue. So sometimes it's better to be quiet, not to say anything, and just to be perceived. Better to be perceived, be given the benefit of the doubt that you might know what you're talking about, than to make it clear that you don't know what you're talking about. And I think, God willing, our plan would be, obviously on Shabbat we'll coordinate what the topic is going to be in between now and then, sometime, anytime. And then next week we'll try to do some more of these, and I'll bring some more Proverbs to work on too, okay?